Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics to help bridge the gap that exists between what we know and what we do in early childhood education. We're starting conversations with academics, authors, decision makers, educators, and parents so that together we can improve the quality of early childhood education while at the same time protecting and respecting the childhood experience. Today, I'm getting vulnerable and personal in the hopes that it might help someone the way a friend helped me. It feels like an understatement to say that there's a lot going on right now, and in all of the upheavals and changes, teachers have been amazing, continually adapting and making the best of a far from ideal situation. But there are a lot of emotions that come with all of those changes, and that's okay. It means we love what we do. It means we're passionate about our work. It means we are fiercely loyal to the children and the families that we serve. If you have that kind of a heart for the work that you do, there's going to be some level of hurt to have the kinds of abrupt changes that we've experienced. For me, it looked like this. Some of my very favorite parts of the work that I do takes place when I travel to different school groups around the country to provide training or when I go to conferences to speak. I love the energy of getting right in with professionals who are just as passionate about early education as I am. I love seeing their eyes light up with new realizations and ideas and the excitement of improving and growing. I love the work that I am blessed to be a part of. So when this pandemic suddenly put everything on hold, I knew that that would mean a lot of changes for the work that I do, at least for now. And I was sad. I was frustrated and I was angry. I was disappointed about the plans that would have to change, for the progress that I felt would be lost, and for the changes that I knew I would have to make. I found myself slipping into emotions and then catching myself saying, this is silly. I shouldn't be sad about this. There are literally people dying right now, and I don't have the right to be sad about some projects and plans that will in all likelihood work themselves out eventually. I need to stop feeling this way. I just kept arguing with myself, trying not to feel my emotions because I didn't feel like they were the right ones to have. And at the same time, I needed to start making some changes so that I could serve people the best way possible in the given circumstances. But I felt so stuck that I just didn't even know where to start. So I'm talking with a friend of mine who also happens to be a professional coach, and that is always convenient to have friends like this. I highly recommend surrounding yourself with people who are just better at certain aspects of life than you are. It's a great life hack. So I'm venting to my friend about feeling overwhelmed and trying to decide where to start with all of these changes. And she essentially stops me and says, I think you need to grieve what you've lost before you can move forward and make plans. It's hard because you're trying to do two things at once. And I was sort of startled at first, like, grief? I'm not grieving. But as I thought about what she said, I thought, maybe that's the name of this knot that I've been feeling, right? This pent up energy that I've been wrestling with, like a big shadowy obstacle that's between me and this new path forward. So a short time later, in a moment of frustration, when my emotions were getting the best of me, I blurted out, fine, I grieve this, okay? I grieve what I lost. Now, can I just get on with the work I need to do? And even though it was in a moment of frustration and I was honestly kind of being sarcastic, the funny thing is it lifted. It didn't go all the way away right then, but it definitely started to lift. Soon after, in that funny way that your attention works, I stumbled on an article here and then a few podcasts there all about grief and how it relates to our experiences in this pandemic. And I started to realize that what they were describing was exactly what I was feeling. I'll link to all of those resources in the show notes for this episode, which you'll find at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 33. So as states and districts begin this trickling process of making final announcements about the school year, many closing, at least physically, for the remainder of the school year, I've seen my own process reflected in educators around the country, these feelings of loss, over the progress we were making, over the plans we'd set out, over the routines that we loved, 100 little precious things that happened every day, over the work that we love, and most of all, over these children that we love. There's a collective mourning over the school year we thought we would have. I was hoping to be able to help other educators process this grief the way that a good friend helped me. So I thought, who better to bring on the podcast than that friend, Jill Riley. She has some very insightful perspectives that have really helped me and will hopefully help you too as we all move forward and learn some valuable lessons about ourselves in the process. So let's jump in. Hi, Jill. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
So what I'm hoping we can talk about today is this concept of grief, which sounds like a really heavy topic and something a lot of people don't feel like applies to them right now. But as we've talked before, I'm listening to a lot of parents, a lot of teachers, and they're all wrestling with this school year that they thought they would have and what they're realizing it is now. I know in my state, they've canceled school for the rest of the year. They've gone ahead and announced that. And there's kind of this trickle throughout the United States of districts that are closing for the rest of the year, at least physically. I know there's a lot of online options going on, but they're closing down for the rest of the year. And I think there's the combination of the finality of things being closed and also the anticipation of those calls that have not been made yet. And I'm just noticing a lot of people wrestling with a lot of emotion. Again, largely around what they expected, things they had worked for, gains they were seeing, things they had planned on, and it's all either up in the air or completely canceled. And there's a lot of emotion that goes with that. But as I personally was struggling with some of those emotions, you were one of the first people to help me realize that one of the things I was wrestling with, and the reason I couldn't get past it to do other things, was that I was wrestling with grief. And I know I was one of those people who said, no, it's not grief. No one died in my life right now. It's not grief. That's not what it is. But you were the first one to help me to acknowledge what I was feeling, or at least what I was trying not to feel, and give it and to give it the name of grief, which started me down actually processing it and dealing with it. And I really wrestled again with that label of grief because I felt like it wasn't deep enough. It wasn't serious enough. But you saw it and you named it, which I found really interesting because I know you and I both have worked in early childhood, and we've spent, and a lot of people listening as well, have spent a lot of time helping young children to name emotions so that they can work through their emotions. But it's so much harder, at least for me as an adult, to do the same thing. So let's start at the top. And can you tell me a little bit about how would you define grief to help people, first of all, to just name it and put a label on it? How would you define it?
I would define it in a change in our expected outcome. So it really can be anything that we expect. That goes along with death also, right? Because if you look at when you lose somebody, there's all of these things that they are no longer going to be a part of. It is a part of that grief even with death, is that things that you expected to happen are now not going to happen. So then if you put it in a situation like a job change or things that just normally naturally happen, a new relationship or a change, anything that's going to change your future, what you thought was going to happen is now your future is totally different now than what you thought that it was going to be.
And so grief is just a part of that loss, right? Which is when you say it that way, it totally makes sense because you can associate it to all the different types of grief that people can feel, that it has to do with expectations in the future that are no longer met, things that we kind of took for granted as a comfortable plan, and now it's not going to work out. And that feeling of loss that comes with it.
Yes.
And I'll link in the show notes. There's a couple of great podcasts from Brene Brown where she tackles this topic, and she talks with David Kessler. And I think he used the phrase, it's the death of something or the loss of something. That it doesn't have to be a person's death, but like you were saying, an expectation that dies for you, something that you planned and expected on. And it's the loss of something that you love. And so I think as I listen to teachers who I can now see, because you've helped me through that on the other side, I can see they're wrestling with the grief of losing the school year that they expected to have. And I think we push against calling it grief, but they love their jobs and they love their kids and they love the things that they had planned and worked on.
And already last year at this time, they were already setting up for this year. They were already in the back of their head going, but I'm going to do this differently next year. And I'm going to add in this next year. And it is really big. It is really big. And so, yeah, it's the change. Oh, yeah, it's really hard. The end of the year. Hard. We got the announcement yesterday for us.
Did you, for your state? And you're in Colorado?
Yeah. So we're not going back. And I have an 8th grade son. So along with that comes, the parties and the promotions and, there's so many things on a big scale, but then there's also on the smaller scale. My sister and I were talking last week. She's a high school teacher, and she was saying this time of year, she would be doing all these little things that she never really thought about. Oh, what am I going to do without you in my class next year? Or, I'm going to miss this about you. And those little things that just naturally happen that she never probably even thought about, she's realizing now are not there. And so it's not just one big change.
Right.
It's many, many little changes.
And because of that, there may be several waves. You may grieve one thing and think you're fine, and then realize something else and feel it all over again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you're reminding me as you're talking about that it's not just losing a year that they expected, but it's this part of the year that so many teachers all teachers work so hard for the beginning of the year, establishing so many things. And in many ways, the end of the year is that payoff where you get to kind of see the full blossoming of what you've worked for and built, and the progress and the relationships and those things. And the planning, like you said, even the rhythm and routine of closing the chapter, moving to the next clean page, and having a process and a procedure that you typically follow. And now feeling, I know for me, when I feel out of sorts that way, even though it doesn't seem, I can look at it and say this isn't a big deal, but it feels uncomfortable, and that will really just kind of gnaw. And I think there are a lot of people feeling that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So once a person is ready to put the name on it and to admit that maybe I'm grieving something, again, I feel like even now, I feel like that's a big, heavy word, but if we can finally...
But even, and as you say, it's a big, heavy word. So if we're talking about, what's something that happens at the end of the year? Let's say, well, what about Mother's Day party, right? The Mother's Day party is something we're just about to miss. It's going to come up and we're going to miss it. If you just think, I am sad about the Mother's Day party, it even feels smaller than when you say it's the big end of the year, right? But it still matters because it matters to you. And that is, I think it was one of the Brene Brown podcasts that you sent me that was, it's
the comparative suffering.
Oh, yes. And it was, they said, the only grief that matters is your grief. The only sadness that matters is yours. And I probably didn't say it correctly, but it matters to you, so it matters.
Mm-hmm. So that really struck me too. I think she was talking to David Kessler, who's a grief specialist, but also who lost his own son. And so when he said, I think she asked something like, what is sad enough to grieve, or what is the deepest loss, or what is, when can you call it a loss? When I can't remember the exact question, but it was in that frame. And he said, it's the one that's yours. Yeah. It's the one that you feel, the one that you're experiencing. And I think that just gives us all permission to say, it matters. Just like you said, this matters. And it's okay to feel sad about it because it does matter, and it matters to me. And the reason it matters to me is because I love what I do, and I do it so well, and I do it with passion. And that's not something that we should shy away from or feel bad about feeling, right? That we shouldn't feel guilty for feeling grief about this work that we love.
And I want to also say, one of the things you said is that naming it was what helped you, really naming it. And so I think that at that point, it is important to really look at the small things. at the Mother's Day party, at the end of the year graduation, with their cute little, I still vividly remember my son and his niece together with their little caps, their little homemade caps. And every one of those moments that you can say, okay, yes, I am sad about this thing and grieve that one specific thing, it is going to be much easier to move beyond it than to look at it as a whole, because then it's still not, when you're looking at it as a whole, I'm sad about the end of the year, you're not going deep enough to really feel it. It's still so big. But if you can say, I'm really sad because one of my favorite things is all of the gratitude I get from the parents at the end of the year. And then you can really look at that exact moment and know that is why I'm sad. That's what I need to grieve, is that exact moment.
So that was kind of leading into the next thing I was wondering about. So once someone is willing to say, this is grief, this is, okay, I can admit that I'm sad about this, I can finally stop fighting against feeling this and just feel it. What do you do about it? Like, is it enough to just feel it and acknowledge it?
I think sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And I think as soon as you've done enough, as soon as you felt enough, I think But it's like you said, it waves, right? And I think waves is because of it's not just one, it's not just one thing. It's lots and lots of things. It's things you didn't think about yet. It's things it's going to pop up and you're going to go, oh yeah, but I don't get to do that too. Oh yeah, but I haven't sat on the floor, right? I haven't sat on the floor in weeks, which is part of who I am, is to sit on the floor for half the day. So it is still going to come. But when you get to the feeling, okay, so you're beyond the, I don't understand why I'm feeling this way. I shouldn't feel this way because somebody else has it worse than me. But you can actually say like, okay, this is what I'm grieving. Then I like to go, why? Okay, but why? But why? And keep asking why until you have the, oh, yeah. Okay, so why does, let's see if I can think of a good preschool example. Why do I feel really awful on Tuesdays? Why is Tuesdays my worst day? Well, because on Tuesdays, the art teacher comes in and does a special project with the kids, and I get to sit back and watch their excitement and their okay, so why does that part bother me? Because just being in the classroom brings me joy, and being close to that innocence. And if you can keep going, but why, and then suddenly you'll think something or you'll say something and you'll go, oh, yeah, that's the part that hurts. That's the spot that hit. And then from that, however long it takes to feel that, it might be a matter of seconds. It might just be like for you said, I recognized it, right? And then you had a couple more minutes after, but it was the naming it for you. But sometimes it's then a week or a couple of days, where you're going, okay, but now what do I do with this? What do I do with this? I'm feeling, until you can start looking for opportunities or actions that you can take to move out of it. If you can name something, then opportunity and action comes much easier. So if you know that feeling the gratitude and the love from the parents is something that you really, really miss, you can feel it. Because I know at our school, it's every time an announcement goes out, there's 20 comments. The teachers may not be looking at those, may just be going to the staff, but if you want it, it's there. If they want to go look for it, it's there. So it is, if you can name what it is, then you can find an alternative action that you can take to at least get you close to it. If you're denying it, then you cannot get to that point.
Such a good point. Yeah. So even though you can't take the action that will change it, you can't suddenly say, we're having school in my class because that's what I need right now, right? That's not going to happen. But if you can name it, like you said, and go through that process, you can find out what is it that's really the deeper, where does this really start? And where else can I maybe find that same feeling or that same connection, or find, even if it's reflecting back on the year or pulling out notes that you already have, or expressing your gratitude to somebody, which helps you still feel that gratitude. I just think that's really powerful to be able to realize what it is. And backing up, even as you said, just naming it. I know for me, and I've talked earlier in the introduction about my own experience, but when you first said to me, you've got to process that grief before you can move on to these other things that's making you feel so stuck here.
Because you're trying to do two things at once.
Yeah, you can't just skip over it. Like, I think so often we're just like, jump over that discomfort, jump over that grief and get to work, right? Especially there's so many teachers right now. They're like, I don't have time to feel grief. I've got to figure out how to do this new normal right now and meet all these needs. But it's so hard to do that new normal if you haven't processed that feeling that you have. And for me, it was kind of funny. And I think I told you that you said that and I kind of processed it around. And then I was talking to my husband and I, for a couple days, I kept fighting this. I kept like tearing up and fighting with it. Like, I'm not going to feel this. This is silly. And there are other people that are suffering more. And I shouldn't have my feelings, was kind of what I was telling myself. And after you mentioned that, and I was getting emotional again, and I said to him, like, Jill says I need to feel my grief. I need to grieve this. So I grieve this. Okay, fine. I grieve this. And I was being sarcastic. But then I kind of sat there and was like, oh my gosh, I think I feel a little bit better. I really do. Just acknowledging it and saying it's okay to be sad and to feel this and acknowledge it and call it grief. And like you said, it's not like it was all immediate, but that was definitely where it started. And there was a huge lift just in saying, this is grief and I can stop fighting it. I didn't realize how much emotion was wrapped up in fighting the emotion. Like there was all this energy that it took just to try not to feel what was already there, which again, I think is so funny for anybody that works with young children because we see it in young children all the time, right? We're helping them work through these emotions. And because they don't have the vocabulary and the social skills to go with all those emotions, we see it come out in a bunch of other ways. We see the other behaviors that go along with it. And once we help them to recognize their emotions and to be able to tell somebody, I'm angry, instead of hitting, that's a huge piece of growth, right? But for some reason, as adults, there's a disconnect, at least for me, and I think for a lot of other adults, that we feel like we don't need to feel our feelings, or we don't, but the same is true once we can even just name it and acknowledge it and say it's okay to have those feelings, just like we do with the kiddos, right? It's okay to have those feelings, all the feelings, every feeling and emotion is okay. There's not a wrong one to have. I can say that all day and night when I'm talking about kids, but when you said that to me and I was like, oh, not grief. That's not what I shouldn't be feeling that right now. So we need to give that same grace to ourselves to name it, and that empowers us to move forward.
Absolutely.
So interesting.
And you brought up a good point when you said, it finally came out verbally to your husband, is we all feel and release feelings in different ways. So if you're a writer, sit down and write. If you are verbal, yell in the mirror, or, go for a walk, or, put a headphone in like you're listening or talking to somebody, and talk to yourself while you're walking, or go for a drive, or, there are so many different ways. If you're visual, do some art, do art like with your preschoolers, get out some angry colors and mix colors and, whatever way is going to help you release it. Cause I think that was important. I think you verbally had to say it out loud. I think that had to come first.
To really admit it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that I was actually going to ask, as you talk about processing through it, I was going to ask, I know you're a big fan of journaling.
Yeah.
And which is funny because I love writing, but for some reason I have a hard time with journaling. I should do it. It makes complete sense. So I was going to ask if you would recommend, as you're talking about all that processing, is that something people should journal? And I guess you kind of already answered that maybe for some they should journal, and maybe for some they should do art, and maybe for some it's something else.
And maybe for some it's talking to a friend who is either going to understand, or, I think one of the reasons, it's funny you brought up that we're allow it for children. I think there's so many things adults see easily in children and then don't have the same expectation for themselves, but that's a whole different podcast. But I think, that for adults, one of the things is we don't want to get stuck in whining, complaining, and this has the potential to do that, right? So when I'm saying call a friend, it isn't necessarily, it might be just a vent, right? It might be a vent, but it could turn into complaining that feels like then it's a never ending complaining thing. And I think that happens. So I think of it like if it's a circle, right? And the actual thing you're grieving is in the middle, right? And you're going to ask why to get to the middle, but you start out on the edge. And that's, I have no patience. I'm frustrated. I can't focus on anything. I'm so irritated with the way other people are behaving. I'm not acting like myself. Those are all like on the outer edge, and they don't really have anything to do with the middle, which is exactly what you talked about with kids, right? They don't know how to name it, so they're doing all these other behaviors. If you feel like there's a very big difference in a phone call to a friend that is, I'm actually feeling this and I need to express it, then I want to complain to you. And you can feel the difference. So if it is that it's turning into that, then you need to go deeper. Then end that conversation and go, okay, got to go deeper, because this isn't hitting the true point. It's a cycle then. It becomes a cycle. Where my example with that is like we don't argue now, of course, sometimes we do. I've been married to my husband for 15 years, so we do argue from time to time. But when we were younger, we were newer together earlier in our relationship, one of the things I learned very quickly is I do not ever say something to him immediately when I think it. I have to go and I have to say, what he did bothered me. The feeling that I have is annoyed or frustrated. Why? What is the reason why? Because as soon as I can go, oh, it hurt my feelings. Oh, as soon as I can name it, whether it's, whatever the feeling is, as soon as I can name it, then it's no longer a cycle. Then it's more of an absorption. It's more of like, okay, oh, now I know what it is. That outer ring is just tricky. Did I go around on that?
No, I was actually wondering that, because I think it hits on a lot of what I was just wondering, that sometimes I think we avoid our feelings because we don't want to be complaining. We don't want to be whining. We don't want to feel like we're wallowing in our emotions, right? And so that was kind of what I was wondering. And I think you already hit on that how do we find that line between I am feeling my emotions and acknowledging them so that I can work through them and be a better, more productive person, versus I am having a pity party now and I can no longer function because I'm just going to be in my feelings all the time, and finding that line. And I think you hit on a lot of that it's first just recognizing, here are all the things I feel, but what's at the root of it, so I can really acknowledge that. And I feel like for me personally, it's also knowing, so as you talked about venting to somebody, I think it's also knowing who you go to for that there are some people that you might go to them and say, here are, I want to process all these feelings. I want to verbalize, here's the outer ring of the circle and here's what I think is in the middle and what I'm feeling. And there are some people that you can go to and talk to about that, and you're going to walk away feeling worse. And there are others who you're going to walk away feeling like, I shouldn't have even said that. They're just going to try to patch everything, right? And like, but everything's okay, when maybe that's not what you need to hear. And there are others who are just going to say, yeah, that's hard, and I love you, right? Or whatever it is that's going to help in that moment. That it's finding the right person that's going to help you maybe ask some hard questions and process through it in a productive way that can help you walk away feeling like, oh, I got it off my chest. I validated those feelings. I'm moving forward. And other people may not. So I think some of it is finding your way. Like you mentioned, there's different avenues to take. And for many of us, I think it's going to a person and talking to them and getting out those feelings. But I think it's really important to find the right one that makes it a productive. I don't know. Can you maybe give more on that, on what makes it a productive venting versus a pity party?
I think you nailed it. It's if you leave feeling like, yeah, I'm charged up. Now I'm going to go fight this off, and I'm going to do, and it extends the turmoil. Because you're not looking for turmoil. You're not looking to extend the fight. You're looking for peace, and you're looking for calm. And so if you end the conversation, then you go, yeah, well, that wasn't what I needed. I'm looking for, and perhaps validation. Perhaps it is a little bit of validation to say, yeah, you know what? It is really sad that the smell of paint is not wafting through, you're like, it's not all these things. And just to have the validation, know that you can know who it's going to be that you can talk to until you're in it. But I think you can recognize quite quickly and end the conversation and switch the subject or whatever. But as you were talking, I was thinking, if you have a trusted somebody to talk to, and maybe this isn't the time to go look for that person, but if you have a trusted person, they may be able to help you go, but why? You may go, I am feeling so angry. Okay, here's a good one. I'm angry, let's say, so the decision that our school made is that even though the governor has not called the school, he has made the choice to call it. So he made the decision. He could have made a different decision. And as a parent or as a teacher, I could be angry about that. So let's say if I'm angry about that and I were to say to a person, I don't think that the feelings of anger that I have are actually right. Like I think mentally I'm not angry, but emotionally I can't shake it. Can you help me walk through this? It's a matter of, so why is this bothering me so much? Why is this bothering me so much? Because it has zero to do with him and more to do with, well, I still had this hope that I was going to get to do the last day of school. Mm-hmm. I still had this hope that I was going to get to hand out these cards that I've been making all year, that I've been stockpiling these things all year. I still had this hope, and he just took it away from me. Mm-hmm. So you're not mad at him, but it's the asking the why until you get to, it's the hope. It's the change in my expected outcome. And so, did that answer the question?
Yeah. So that brings it back. I mean, that's where you bring it back down that it's grief. And I think you mentioned something that to me is kind of I don't know, like a red light that says, hey, wait a minute, when you're feeling something that your logical mind says, what, I'm angry at someone I'm never angry at. Why am I? And I don't even feel like I should be angry. That's the perfect time to say, so why? Why do I feel that way? So that you can drill down and say, you know what? I'm just grieving this thing that I lost. And I'm trying to say he took it from me and he didn't. It's just this situation, it's just what's happening right now, and being able to put that name on it. And I also wondered, as you were talking about finding the right person to help you process through that sometimes we can wear that hat, I think, especially if we kind of channel our own educator self and be the person that we are for children, and just take that turn with ourselves to say, okay, so let's say that I'm talking with a child, it's not going to be exactly the same because we are adults. But if we can just channel that same compassion and that same process that we go through with them, picture ourselves getting down on getting down on their level and our eyes, and that connection that we have when we help kids work through their emotions. And I know for me anyway, that's when I slow down and we validate and rephrase and take the time to help them talk through every step of it. But then with ourselves, we're racing through. So sometimes if we can just channel that same perspective and treat ourselves with that same compassion and that same process that we use when we help young children with their emotions, and just slow down and ask the questions and validate each part of it, and follow that next lead to ask the next question, we can almost wear that hat ourselves. And maybe that's a journaling exercise. Maybe that's a long run. Maybe that's many different ways that you can go through that process. But for some of us, we can find a person who will do that for us. And for some of us, we can maybe be that person. And that's valid as well, right?
I would always start with yourself. That's what I would say. I would start with yourself, and however you intake information. You're verbal. You're verbal. You're a verbal person. Mm-hmm. So journaling for you, I don't see that as being, I see even talking to yourself or recording messages, or that to me is the same as journaling. So because it's process, it's what you said, it's processing. So what is it? And all of the things that I said, of course, are artistic, which I don't know why, but
maybe because you're artistic, and I know there are people in your house who are very artistic, and that might be why that's right where you go. That's where they process things.
But it doesn't have to be. It could be, like you said, a run, or it could be swinging in the backyard. There are so many different ways to process. And gosh, I mean, I'm a silver lining kind of a person, but my goodness, if you take this super magnified grief, I mean, this is this is not something that is normal for any of us to experience this level of grief over and over and over again with so little control. If you take this magnified situation, imagine how much you're going to learn about yourself. And imagine how, if you can figure out how to name and move through this grief, imagine how much more prepared you're going to be when something, even bigger comes along. Or, it just, that's I think where the silver lining is. This grief is going to give us the opportunity to learn so much about ourselves.
And I think that's an important perspective to have, because I know while I was still in the middle of wrestling with my own grief, and I came across some kind of a post that said something to the effect of, that in this, this is a moment where we can choose who we're going to be, and we want to be able to look back and be proud of the person we were in this moment. Something to that regard. And I just remember thinking, well, great, I already blew it, because I'm still in the middle of anger and sadness and denial and all of these other things. And I think it was a well-intended, cheerleading post to some degree. But I think it's important for people to realize the grief is good. It's okay. And you will grow through it if you process it. And it's not something to feel guilty about, or like, oh, great, we already failed the test, or we're just not as resilient as other people. Resiliency means you got knocked down and then you got up. The resiliency doesn't mean you never got knocked down. It doesn't mean that you never struggled with this feeling that was hard. And I think that that's important for us as teachers and as parents. I think there's also that same emphasis that, our kids are not going to be as cognizant of all the big things that were going on, but they'll remember what was happening in our house. And same thing, I thought, that is great as long as parents know how to handle their grief. If they're just trying to put on this happy face over and over and over, and they're not acknowledging and feeling their own feelings, that's not going to work.
And, you bring a really great point, because as I said, with an 8th grader, so my 8th grader is super mellow kid. So he at this point, he's had zero reaction to the fact that he's not going back. He's fine with it, whatever. If my grief over this end of the year stuff is totally, completely separate of his grief over this, and if I don't pay attention myself first to how I'm feeling, I've got to watch him. I've got to be watching him, because one of these days it is going to hit him. And, I don't know how. I don't know how it's going to manifest itself. I don't know. But if I don't already go, okay, and I'm doing this today, so I'm going to start, this is where I'm going to get a little bit emotional. I have to think about how it personally affects me that we're not going to have a promotion for him, and how it personally affects me that he doesn't get to go to the 8th grade camp. And so I need to find my grief in that, so that when it comes from him, then I am in a much better place to help him nail down where his feelings are, because his feelings don't have to be the same as mine. And maybe he doesn't care about those things that I said. Maybe he cares about something that I don't actually even know was happening. And so there's so many different levels of grief on this.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really important point, because we can't feel someone else's grief for them. Yes. So first of all, we can't be present for them if we haven't managed our own grief and acknowledged it and worked towards, they talk about the stages of grief, and we know that those are more messy than is implied in the word stages. But that David Kessler talks about in his new book, talking about how the next part after acceptance comes meaning. And I loved in one of the articles that I'll link in the show notes, he talks about once you can accept it, that's where the power is, because now we can move forward and we can make meaning and we can take action, but we have to work through acceptance. And so all that to say that you have to get through your acceptance, right, and work through your own grief. I want the grown-ups to realize we have to be able to work through to our own acceptance, because there are young people as well, our own children, the children we're working with, and we can't really acknowledge their grief if we haven't acknowledged ours. And at the same time, I think you make a great point that we have to realize that those are separate, that we need to be there to validate whatever it is that they're feeling, even though it may be completely different than ours. Mm-hmm. And we need to validate it, but not commiserate and throw gas on the fire, right?
And I was thinking the same, exactly what you're saying. When we're talking about how do you be that person, so if we're talking about going out and looking for that person who we can vent to versus complain to. Imagine if we are not in that place of where we've gotten to peace and acceptance, we cannot be that for them. Then instead, we fuel the anger, the frustration. We're then fueling that outer ring rather than bringing the calm to say, yes, feel it. Let's go a little bit deeper. Yes, be angry about that today. Or, you will just keep them stuck because you cannot be that, okay, but why person if you haven't already gotten there.
Mm-hmm. And it's important, I think, even just to recognize, like you have, that I think sometimes we get so blindsided by all of our own emotions to then not be ready to help other people. So recognizing, okay, I've got to deal with my emotions today because at some point I need to help him with his when he's ready. Yeah. And I'm ready now for mine. So yeah. What's that?
I need to be ready for him to not need it at all. And
True too.
If I haven't accepted it on my own and he just never even goes through it, then I know I'm going to feel much more like, but what is going on? Why doesn't this bother you? We should, let me create some tension here because it should bother you,
And making sure we have that healthy separation, because I think as we acknowledge, as teachers, as we acknowledge what we are grieving, we don't want to then spill that over into, now let's all feel grief because I've decided we feel grief. It's completely individual. We just have to have our own processed through so that individually, as we are working with parents who are expressing that grief or children who are expressing that grief, that we can individually acknowledge and validate. But it doesn't help to say, I feel grief, so we're all going to feel grief right now. That's just not how it works.
No. And I think once you've hit the spot, I don't think it will spill over. Once you've gotten down to the why, I don't think it does spill over, because then it is so very personal. And you know the thing, you're not going to go around and say, this is unfair and this is unfair and this is unfair and this is unfair, because that's not the heart of it. Because the heart of it, you've already named and you've already processed. And that part isn't the part that runs around and gossips and complains and whines and fuels fires.
Such a great point. So when we take those, I love that visual that you give of there's a circle, and at the center of it is something we lost. That is grief. Yes. And so when we can name what it is that we lost, the many things and the many different ways that causes grief, that becomes a personal thing that we name. That acceptance brings us power and helps us to say, okay, now that I know what it is and I have a name on it, is that enough? Did I just need to acknowledge it and grieve it? Or what can I do? Like you said before, I miss the gratitude. So how can I express gratitude or go recognize gratitude or create an opportunity for gratitude? So it gives us a place of action. And I hesitate to say that because it doesn't always require action. It's not always, where's the Band-Aid? How can I fix it? But it gives us a place to move from. We start with that acceptance, and that's how we get away from, I love that visual, the outer circle, the rim of that circle is where all the less productive, I hate to use that word, that's probably not the right word, but those other emotions, the tension, that's a good word. All those other emotions that create so much tension because we haven't gotten to the heart of it. And so it's like we're just swimming around in circles and putting so much energy into it when we really just need to go to the center, acknowledge what it is that we lost that's really causing those feelings so that we can have that acceptance, that power to move forward towards meaning. I think that's a really helpful visual to me.
And I just really love what you said, that it just doesn't always require to take action. It really doesn't. If you're really paying attention to every single step, you can feel it. When you've gone, okay, that's what I needed.
I just needed to name it, which again, going back to our experience with children, we've seen that as well, that as soon as they can name it, the anger's gone, the tension's gone, right? Some of those behaviors are gone. They just wanted somebody to say, I see you feeling this. And it's that there's a name for it now and that someone sees it, right?
You just gave me chills, because this is what I'm picturing. I am picturing all of these grief-stricken teachers standing in a mirror and looking at themselves and saying, I see you hurt. I just see it.
And that's the compassion we can offer ourselves. And I know all of these teachers have that compassion because they're extending it to children every single day. They're extending it to parents every single day. And I think there's this point right now where teachers need to be extending it to themselves and to each other to
Yes.
name this loss and acknowledge it as a loss and to feel it and to say, so where do we go now, right? Do I take action, or do I just need to name it and feel it and see it and say, I see that. I see that, and it's okay, and we're here together. We're here with you. So I guess that kind of brings it to your specialty of helping people get unstuck, right?
Yep.
And it's such a gift that you have. And so I'm curious how, and maybe we've covered some of this, how that feeling of grief, how does it keep people stuck? Why is it that when we can't acknowledge the grief, we so often just feel stuck, like we don't know how to move forward, we don't know how to handle all the other things that come with it, all the other things we have to deal with, and people just feel stuck?
Okay, I have 3 different examples of where I've really had grief in my life, but I think the one that makes the most sense, a few years ago, I had a business, and all the back end stuff of that doesn't matter, but I made a change in my business and it pretty much died. It was a change, and unexpectedly the business died. Now, I didn't really love the business anyway, but it was mine, and it was the outcome changed. For 2 years, I'm kind of embarrassed to even say 2 years because, my goodness, really, that's how long it took me. But for 2 years, I stuck in that outer ring, and I fought it, and I fought the tech stuff, and I fought the stuff that I won't tell you because it's stuff you wouldn't understand anyways, but I fought all of the stuff that I didn't have control over. I kept fighting, and I kept complaining, and I kept saying, but why can't I just make this work? And this makes me, this isn't, I sat in this real place of frustration, and the whole thing is I was trying to get back to something that I didn't even want in the first place, And which I know is a very different situation than now, because of course you all want to get back in the classroom. So, but I was stuck there because I hadn't let go yet. And it was about 2 years in, and I didn't say grief. What I said was, I have to mourn this, which of course is the same thing as saying grief. But as soon as I said to myself, I have to mourn this, I have to say goodbye to it, I have to acknowledge that it's changed. There's nothing I can do to bring it back. It has changed now. And it was one weekend, and everything changed. I was able to then go, oh, but this is what I can do with what's left. This is what I can do with this part that's still standing. I can change my relationship to the business, and I can move on to what I really actually want to be doing. And that is the problem. If we stay stuck in that outer ring, then we are fighting the wrong things, and we cannot move forward. I was bouncing back and forth the same thing for 2 years, bouncing back. I had the same questions, I had the same concerns, I had the same issues over and over and over again, because I didn't really figure out what I actually needed to do was let go and be sad and just let go.
And so once we can acknowledge that,
Yeah.
It's really empowering to stop swimming the circle on the outer rim and to just come to the center where the water is calm, right?
Yes.
And to acknowledge it and to be able to move forward, and how empowering that is. And I just thank you so much for what you've shared today, because I think there are so many teachers, like we said, they are passionate about what they do, and that's why they feel this loss. And to help them get unstuck and to acknowledge the feeling, to show the compassion to themselves and to each other, and to then go to that empowered position of saying, so now that we've acknowledged it, we can move forward. So thank you for helping them with that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I love Jill's image of a circle. And on the outside of that circle is all the tension, the frustration and anger and discomfort. But at the center of that is the grief. It's the realization and the acknowledgement of what was actually lost. For many of us, and I was there, we're expending so much energy fighting the current on that outer circle. But the calm water is in the center. As Jill said, if we're stuck in that outer ring, we can't move forward. But if we can be for ourselves and for each other that emotion coach that we are for the children that we love and teach, and if we can slow down and really process what we're feeling, give it a name, acknowledge and validate it, we will find that calmer water in the center of the circle, and we'll find a way to move forward. I hope this episode has helped you to move toward that, because I know that there are better days ahead. And I know that between now and then and beyond, there is an amazing work for us to do and an important role for each of us to play as we continue to serve and advocate for the children we love and teach. Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 33. You'll also find links to some great podcasts, books, and articles we reference in this episode. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. And follow me on Facebook. That's facebook.com/notjustcute. I'm also freshly on Instagram, so follow me there at Amanda_notjustcute. Thanks for listening today, and as always, thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.